Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive. The holidays, well, they're supposed to be about joy, right? But when you're dealing with grief, it can be tough, really tough. We've gotten a lot of requests to dig into Cesar Sanchez's book, The Empty Seat at the Table, and how it relates to this time of year.
Yeah, that empty seat, that image is so powerful, isn't it? Sanchez really gets how the holidays can make grief so much more intense. It's like everywhere you look, there's a reminder of who's missing.
It's true, but what I appreciate about Sanchez is he doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He acknowledges the pain head on, doesn't try to tell you to just, get over it.
No, not at all. What I find so helpful is he emphasizes that there's no one right way to grieve. It's different for everyone.
And especially around the holidays, I think. Like there's this pressure to be cheerful, to keep up traditions, but inside you're feeling anything but.
Exactly. Sanchez's approach is really about acknowledging that absence, that empty space, not just like physically at the dinner table, but emotionally too. It's
Yeah.
like he's giving us permission to say, hey, this hurts.
Yeah, that honesty can be really powerful. So often there's this pressure to pretend everything's fine. But Sanchez encourages us to lean into those feelings instead of avoiding them.
Right. To be upfront about what we're going through. And I think that's where his ideas about adapting traditions come in. It's like, how can we honor the person who's gone within those celebrations?
I'm thinking about that empty chair at the table. It's so symbolic, isn't it? It's almost like this visual reminder of the emotional void. And it can be tempting to just try to ignore it.
To just power through and pretend everything's normal. But Sanchez suggests we do the opposite.
So how do we actually do that? I mean, it's one thing to say acknowledge the absence, but how does that actually play out in real life, especially during the holidays?
He talks a lot about being intentional, about creating specific moments during the holidays to remember that person.
Mm.
Consciously making space for their memory, even if they're not physically there.
It's like saying, we miss you, your absence matters. That feels much more empowering than just trying to pretend everything's the same.
Exactly. It's about giving ourselves permission to grieve, even amidst all the holiday cheer, which, let's be honest, can be a tough thing to do.
Speaking of grief, I think it would be helpful to kind of unpack what that process actually looks like. You hear a lot about the 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But do those really play out in such a neat and tidy way in real life?
I think that's a big misconception. Sanchez makes it clear that those stages aren't some sort of checklist you go through step by step. It's a lot messier than that.
Oh, good, because I think a lot of people put pressure on themselves to, get over it quickly or to be strong and not show their emotions. And then there's that whole time heals all wounds idea. But is that really true? It feels a bit oversimplified, doesn't it?
Sanchez tackles those head on. He says bottling up your emotions, that's not strength. And healing, that doesn't just happen passively with time. It's an active process.
So it's not just about waiting it out. You have to actually engage with it somehow.
He's really big on that.
Yeah.
He says it's about what you do with that time that really matters.
So how does all of this play out specifically during the holidays? I mean, it seems like the pressure to be joyful, to be festive, to keep up with all the traditions and expectations that could actually make those stages of grief even more intense.
You're absolutely right. Sanchez points that out. He says the holidays tend to kind of amplify those stages because there are all these added layers on top of the grief.
So what do we do? Just brace ourselves for emotional overload?
Well, thankfully, no. He wouldn't just leave us hanging with that, right? Sanchez is all about practical advice. He gives some really good strategies for navigating those challenges.
Okay, don't hold out on us. Give us some of those nuggets of wisdom. What does he suggest?
One of the things he emphasizes is being proactive. Don't just hope that you'll emotionally wing it during the holidays.
Yeah, that rarely works out well.
He suggests making a plan. Like actually sit down and think about which traditions you want to fully engage with this year, which ones you might need to adjust, and which ones you might need to skip entirely.
That's such a good point. Having that roadmap ahead of time can make such a difference.
It's about setting boundaries, protecting your emotional energy. And he also really emphasizes leaning on your support network, talking to friends, family, even a therapist. You don't have to go through this alone.
Support is so crucial. It makes me think about those people who say things like, don't dwell on the past, or it's better to just avoid talking about the person you lost. Should we really just try to push down those memories, especially during the holidays?
Well, Sanchez, he actually challenges that whole idea. He believes those memories are an important part of grieving.
Really? Even if they bring up a lot of painful emotions.
He acknowledges that those memories can be both a source of comfort and pain. You know, They can trigger joy and sadness and guilt and nostalgia. It's this whole mixed bag of emotions, and it's often really amplified during the holidays.
That makes sense. Holidays are so tied to memories and traditions. So if we shouldn't try to suppress those memories, what are we supposed to do with them?
Well, Sanchez sees all of those feelings as valid. He says trying to bury them just makes things harder in the long run.
So instead of avoiding them, what does he suggest we do?
He's got a three-pronged approach. First, allow yourself to feel those emotions fully. Don't try to resist them.
So that's the first step. Just let those feelings be there.
Second, avoid escapism. Don't try to numb the pain with distractions or substances or whatever your go-to might be.
So that's about being present with the discomfort.
And third, practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. Understand that it's okay to have good days and bad days. There's no right way to grieve.
I love that idea of self-compassion. It's so easy to get caught up in the shoulds of grief and forget to just be kind to ourselves. But what about when those memories become really overwhelming, even if we're being kind to ourselves? What does he suggest we do then?
Well, one of his tips is to break down those emotions into smaller pieces. It's like, instead of getting swept away by this tidal wave of grief, ask yourself, okay, what specifically is causing me pain right now? Pinpoint the source.
That's interesting. So it's about getting curious about our own feelings instead of just being consumed by them. I can see how that would be helpful. Any other strategies he recommends?
He also talks about setting boundaries around when you engage with those memories. Like maybe you dedicate a specific time each day to look at photos or listen to their favorite music or journal about the person.
It's like creating a container for the grief instead of letting it spill over into everything else. That makes a lot of sense. What are some of his other tips for dealing with those tough memories?
One that I thought was really interesting was this idea of transforming those memories into action. Maybe you write a letter to the person you've lost, or maybe you engage in an activity that they really enjoyed, something that connects you to their spirit.
So it's about finding ways to keep their memory alive through action, through doing something meaningful. I like that. We've talked about acknowledging the absence, working through those stages of grief, dealing with memories. But how do we actually transform that grief into something positive and meaningful, especially around the holidays? I'm really curious to hear what Sanchez suggests.
This is where the power of ritual comes in. It's especially relevant during the holidays, when we're already surrounded by traditions. Sanchez explains that rituals can help transform that pain into love and remembrance.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about these rituals.
He gives a lot of examples, but the ones that really stood out to me, especially in the context of the holidays, are things that are actually pretty simple to do, but really profound in their meaning.
Okay, I need to hear these. What are some of those simple yet profound rituals?
One that struck me was the idea of lighting a candle in their honor at the dinner table. Such a small act, but so symbolic. It's like acknowledging their absence while also making space for their memory.
I love that. It's not about grand gestures. It's about imbuing those everyday moments with meaning.
Right. And he also mentions things like cooking their favorite dish or leaving a symbolic object in their seat at the table. It's a way of weaving their presence into the celebration, even in their physical absence.
It's like saying, we miss you, but you're still here with us in spirit. Really beautiful. What else does he suggest?
And then something that connects really well to the whole spirit of generosity we associate with the holidays is this idea of giving back in that person's name. Doing something kind for others.
That's interesting. I wouldn't naturally connect acts of kindness with grief, but now that you mention it, it totally makes sense.
Right. It's like taking that grief and turning it outward, using it as fuel to make the world a little brighter. So Sanchez talks about things like donating to a cause that was important to them, volunteering your time in their honor, just finding ways to make a positive impact in their name.
It's like saying, we're going to take this pain and turn it into something good. I love that. But let's be real for a minute. Grief can be incredibly intense. It's not as simple as lighting a candle and everything magically feels better. So what does Sanchez suggest we do when that raw emotional pain hits? What are some practical tools for managing those really tough moments?
Well, that's where his practicality really shines through. He acknowledges that emotional pain is real and it's often very intense. But he also assures us that there are tangible tools and strategies we can use rather than just hoping that those feelings will magically disappear.
So we have to be proactive, just like with planning our approach to the holidays.
Exactly. And one of the most foundational tools he talks about is the breath. He explains how our breath and our anxiety are linked. Like when we're stressed, we tend to take these short, shallow breaths, and that signals to our brain that something's wrong.
Yeah, it's like our body gets stuck in fight or flight mode.
Right. But here's the good news. We can actually use our breath to interrupt that stress response. Sanchez walks us through a bunch of different breathing exercises that can make a world of difference.
I'm intrigued. Which one resonated with you the most?
One that I find incredibly effective, especially when anxiety hits, is diaphragmatic breathing. It's pretty simple. You find a comfortable position, either sitting or lying down, and you place one hand on your chest and the other hand on your abdomen.
Okay, got it. So one hand on the chest, one hand on the belly.
Right. And then you inhale deeply through your nose for a count of 4, making sure that your belly expands while your chest stays relatively still.
Okay, so it's about breathing deep into the belly, not just the chest.
That's it. And then you exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 6, feeling your abdomen contract as you breathe out.
I can already feel myself relaxing just listening to you describe it.
It's pretty amazing, right? And
Yeah.
Sanchez suggests doing this for at least 5 minutes, or even longer if you need to, until you feel that anxiety start to subside. It's like hitting the reset button on your nervous system.
I love that analogy. Resetting the nervous system. Okay, breathing, that's one tool down. What other strategies does he offer for managing that emotional intensity?
Another one he talks about is mindfulness, but he explains it in a way that's really easy to grasp. No esoteric jargon or anything like that. It's just about being present in the moment and accepting your emotions without judgment.
I love that. No judgment, especially when you're already dealing with so much. That judgment-free zone is so welcome.
Right. And what's really cool is that practicing mindfulness can actually reduce the intensity of those difficult emotions. Instead of resisting them, you're just allowing them to be.
So instead of getting swept away by the current, we're learning to kind of ride the wave. But how do we actually do that? I mean, I've heard the term mindfulness, but I'm not sure I really understand how to practice it. What are some concrete steps?
One technique he suggests that I found really grounding is the body scan meditation. You find a quiet place, close your eyes, and just take a few deep breaths. And then you bring your attention to your feet. Notice any sensations, warmth, tingling, pressure, whatever you feel, without labeling them as good or bad. Just observe.
Okay, I'm picturing it like a gentle wave of awareness moving through the body. But what's the purpose of noticing all those sensations?
It's all about anchoring yourself in the present moment. Instead of getting lost in your thoughts or worries, you're bringing your awareness to your physical body. And if you notice any areas of tension, you can gently breathe into that area, imagining it softening and releasing.
Ah, so it's like a mini vacation for your mind and body. Okay, we've got breathing and mindfulness. What else does Sanchez include in this grief toolkit?
This one might surprise you, journaling.
Oh, interesting. I usually think of journaling as a way to kind of explore your thoughts and feelings, not necessarily for managing grief.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception. Sanchez explains that journaling can be a really powerful way to process those emotions, to get clarity on your thoughts, even to release pent-up pain. It's like creating a safe space to express those feelings that you might not be ready to share with anyone else.
So it's not just about keeping a diary, it's about actively exploring those difficult emotions.
Exactly. And he offers a few specific journaling exercises. One that he highlights is writing a letter to the loved one you've lost. He says it can be a really intense emotional experience, but in a cathartic way.
It's like a way to keep that connection alive, even if it's just through words on a page. What does he suggest writing about?
Just let your heart speak. Write about what you're feeling, what you miss, the memories you cherish most. Allow yourself to cry, to laugh, to express whatever comes up, and there's no pressure to share it with anyone. You can keep it, burn it, tear it up, whatever feels right for you.
It's like releasing those emotions and giving them a tangible form. Sometimes it can be really powerful to externalize what we're feeling inside. Any other journaling techniques he recommends?
He also talks about gratitude journaling, which might seem kind of counterintuitive when you're grieving.
I was just thinking that. It's like, am I really supposed to try to find things to be grateful for when I'm in so much pain? It feels forced somehow.
I know, it can feel that way at first. But Sanchez believes that the act of focusing on the positive aspects of your life, even just for a few minutes each day, can help counterbalance that pain. Even small things count. Like, write down 3 things you're grateful for: a warm cup of coffee, a sunny day, a kind gesture from a stranger.
It's like training ourselves to notice those little sparks of joy, even amidst the darkness.
And you can even include positive memories of your loved one in your gratitude journal. It's a way to acknowledge the pain of their absence, but also celebrate the joy that they brought to your life.
So we have breathing, mindfulness, and journaling. What a powerful trio. Are there any other essential tools in Sanchez's approach to managing grief?
One of the most important and often the most overlooked is seeking support.
That's so true. It can be so tempting to isolate ourselves when we're hurting. But why is it so important to reach out, especially when it can feel so hard to open up to others?
Sanchez talks about the need for emotional validation. It's like when we share those feelings with someone who listens without judgment, it helps us feel less alone. It's like having someone witness our pain and acknowledge that it's real.
I think that's so crucial, especially when we're questioning our own emotions or feeling like we're somehow doing grief wrong. We need that external reassurance to validate what we're feeling inside.
Right. And he also highlights the benefits of connection. Talking to someone who knew your loved one can strengthen the bond you shared. Sharing stories, memories, it can help us feel their presence even though they're not physically there.
That reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with rituals and traditions. It's all about finding ways to keep those connections alive.
Exactly. And finally, he talks about the importance of perspective. Hearing other people's experiences with grief can help you better understand your own emotions and remind you that you're not alone.
It's like realizing that everyone's journey is different, but we're all walking the same path in a way. It's a shared human experience.
Exactly. And it can be so comforting to know that you're not the only one going through this. And that actually brings us to another really important point that Sanchez brings up, knowing when to seek professional help.
Okay, that's a good segue. So, how do we know when we might need that extra support? What are some signs that it's time to reach out to a therapist?
Well, he mentions a few key things to watch for. One is if you find yourself unable to enjoy anything at all, even activities that you used to love. If those little sparks of joy are just completely gone, that could be a sign.
Yeah, that makes sense. What else?
Also, if you're experiencing constant feelings of guilt or hopelessness, or if you're having trouble with daily tasks because of your grief.
So, it's about acknowledging when the weight of those emotions becomes too heavy to carry on your own. We don't have to try to be superheroes and go it alone.
And I love how Sanchez frames it. He says that seeking help isn't a sign of weakness, it's an act of self-love.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It seems like he's all about empowering us with tools and strategies rather than just telling us to tuck it out.
Exactly. He emphasizes that grief is not a linear journey, but with the right tools, we can navigate it with a little more confidence. Whether it's breathing exercises or mindfulness, journaling, seeking support, we have options. We can choose to take action.
I love that idea that we have agency. We can choose to participate in our own healing. And it feels like we're starting to see how we can reclaim those spaces, those voids, those empty seats, and transform them into something meaningful.
That's exactly where Sanchez takes us next. He reminds us that even though that void left by the person we've lost can be incredibly painful, it can also be an opportunity to honor their memory. And he specifically talks about how we can do that during the holidays.
That's what I've been waiting for. Let's dive into those ideas. How do we take that emptiness and turn it into a tribute? How do we make it a place of love, especially during the holidays?
Well, he starts by describing this concept of, he calls it the void as a space for love.
The void as a space for love.
I love that. It sounds so paradoxical somehow. But I'm intrigued. What does he mean by that?
I know, it sounds kind of abstract, but he explains it so beautifully. He argues that the empty seat at the table, the thing that can be so painful to look at, doesn't have to just be a reminder of their absence. It can be a place where their love still exists. A reminder that they're still present in spirit, even if their physical body isn't there.
I'm getting chills. It's like we can choose to see that space not just as a void, but as a place where their spirit still resides.
And he specifically talks about the symbolism of that empty seat at the table during the holidays. Because the holidays are all about family and togetherness, right? So that empty space really stands out. But instead of just seeing it as a symbol of absence, he encourages us to see it as a symbol of the love that remains. To see it as a reminder of the connection that transcends physical presence. So it's about shifting our perspective, finding beauty in the midst of that pain. That's a powerful reframing. But what about all those complex emotions that come with grief? Especially during a season when there's so much pressure to be happy and cheerful, how do we reconcile those two things?
Well, that's where Sanchez's insights about the nature of grief are so important. He reminds us that grief is not just sadness, it's a whole spectrum of emotions that ebb and flow constantly. And he really emphasizes the importance of allowing ourselves to feel all of them without judgment or guilt. We've talked about the 5 stages, but he's really clear that it's not that simple.
No, it sounds like it's so much more nuanced than that.
He's really adamant about not putting grief in a box. And he specifically acknowledges that A lot of people feel guilty for experiencing moments of joy or laughter while they're mourning. It's like we've internalized this message that we're not allowed to feel happy when we're grieving.
It's like we're supposed to wear our sadness like a badge of honor or something. Like if we're not visibly sad all the time, then it means we didn't love them enough.
Exactly. And he pushes back against that so hard. He says those moments of joy or laughter, they don't diminish the love we felt. They don't mean that we're not grieving or that we've forgotten about the person. It just means we're human.
So it's okay to experience that full range of emotions, even if it feels contradictory at times.
That's really one of his core messages. It's okay to feel everything. He encourages us to embrace all those emotions that surface during grief without trying to suppress them or deny them. He says that's actually part of the healing process.
It's about giving ourselves permission to just to experience the full range of what it means to be human.
He even suggests that allowing ourselves to feel those seemingly contradictory emotions is a sign that we're actually managing the pain in a healthy way. Grief isn't this straight line pointed downward towards sadness. It's a process of adaptation, and there will be moments where we experience joy, peace, gratitude, all of it.
It's like grief is a journey, not a destination. And along that journey, we're going to experience all sorts of emotion.
Right. It's this whole spectrum, not just sadness. And, one of the most common and often most challenging emotions that people experience during grief is guilt.
Yeah, guilt can be such a heady burden to carry.
Sanchez talks about how many people feel guilty for laughing, enjoying a meal, having a good day. It's like we've internalized this message that we're not allowed to feel happy when we're grieving.
So how do we challenge that message? How do we release that guilt and allow ourselves to experience those moments of joy without feeling bad about it?
Well, his advice here is really about self-compassion. Instead of beating ourselves up for feeling happy or having a good day, we can acknowledge those feelings as part of the process and allow ourselves to experience them fully.
That's such an important reminder. It's like we need to give ourselves permission to feel whatever we're feeling without comparing ourselves to others or judging ourselves for it.
Absolutely. He reminds us that grief is actually a sign of love. It's proof of how deeply we cared about the person. Instead of trying to shut down those feelings, we can honor them by allowing ourselves to experience them fully and to seek support when we need it.
So much wisdom there. We've talked about acknowledging the absence, understanding those stages of grief, and riding that emotional roller coaster. But what about healing? Is it even possible to truly heal from such a profound loss, especially around the holidays when those memories are so intertwined with the person who's gone? Is there hope for finding joy again?
That's such a big question, and Sanchez addresses it head on. He acknowledges that the pain of loss might never fully disappear, but he also emphasizes that healing is possible.
Okay, so it's not about forgetting or pretending that it never happened, but about finding a way to move forward with that pain.
Exactly. He says it's not about moving on or forgetting the person we've lost.
Mm.
It's about learning to live with the grief and integrate it into our lives in a way that allows us to keep growing.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. It's not about erasing the pain, but transforming it into something that can coexist with love and happiness and gratitude.
He emphasizes that healing is not a linear process. There's no finish line.
No straight line to the finish line. We've established that.
Exactly. It's a journey, and it will likely have ups and downs, twists and turns, moments of progress and moments of feeling like you're right back where you started.
It's that winding path we talked about earlier. So no set timeline, no right or wrong way to do it.
He really stresses the importance of accepting that non-linear nature of grief, because it's so easy to get frustrated when you feel like you're not getting over it fast enough.
Right, like shouldn't I be further along by now?
He reminds us that there is no set timetable, no right or wrong way to grieve. It's about respecting our own pace, even if it doesn't match up with other people's expectations.
That's such a good reminder, especially during the holidays when those expectations can feel even more intense. But what about that old saying, time heals all wounds? Does Sanchez buy into that?
He agrees that time can soften the edges of the pain, but he doesn't believe that it just magically disappears on its own. He's really adamant that true healing requires active engagement. It's about consciously working through those emotions, finding ways to honor the person you've lost, while also continuing to live your own life to the fullest.
It's about choosing to heal rather than passively waiting for time to do the work for us. What are some of his practical suggestions for how to do that?
He talks a lot about self-care, taking care of your physical and emotional needs.
So what does that look like in practice? What are some specific self-care strategies he recommends?
He talks about the importance of nourishing your body with healthy food, getting enough sleep, moving your body in ways that feel good.
It's like we need to be extra intentional about taking care of ourselves since grief can be so draining. Our bodies need that extra support too, not just our minds.
Right. And he also encourages us to, even if it's just for a few minutes each day, engage in activities that bring us joy, like spending time in nature or listening to music, losing yourself in a good book, reconnecting with a hobby you've neglected.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to feel happy, it's about gently nudging ourselves towards those things that offer comfort and peace.
Exactly. And something else that he's really big on is setting boundaries, saying no. Especially during the holidays, it's easy to overcommit and feel like we have to be everything to everyone. But Sanchez reminds us that it's okay to say no to invitations or to step away from stressful situations.
Yeah, sometimes self-care requires saying no in order to protect our energy. So we've got self-care. What about the connection piece? Why does he emphasize that so much?
Sanchez is a firm believer in the power of community. He stresses that we don't have to go through this alone. He really encourages us to reach out to our support systems.
So who are those people for us?
It could be friends, family, a therapist, support groups, anyone who can offer a listening ear and a compassionate heart.
It's about remembering that we're not alone, and sometimes we need to lean on others for support. What are the benefits of reaching out? What does Sanchez say about that?
He says that sharing our experiences and emotions with others can be really healing. It helps us process our grief, feel validated, and gain new perspectives on what we're going through.
Sometimes it's amazing how just talking about it can make it feel a little less heavy.
It's like taking something that's been stuck inside, bringing it out into the light. And he also encourages us to connect with people who bring us joy, who lift our spirits.
So it's not just about seeking support, it's also about seeking out joy and connection. I like that. What about this idea of finding meaning? How does that fit into Sanchez's approach?
He believes that discovering meaning in our lives, even in the midst of grief, is a really powerful way to move forward. He encourages us to reflect on our values, our passions, the things that light us up.
It's like figuring out what truly matters to us and then making sure our lives reflect those values.
Right. He sees grief as this opportunity to reevaluate our choices and make sure we're living authentically in a way that feels meaningful. And he also suggests that we can find meaning in our grief by honoring the person we've lost.
So through rituals or sharing their stories or doing acts of kindness in their name.
Those are all great examples. He says it's about channeling our grief into something positive, something that makes a difference in the world.
I love that. It's like taking that raw emotional energy and transforming it into something beautiful and meaningful.
And he reminds us that grief, as painful as it is, can also be a catalyst for growth and transformation. It can deepen our understanding of ourselves, our relationships, even the world around us.
That's a powerful legacy to carry with us. Okay, so we've covered self-care, connection, and meaning-making. Lots of really valuable tools and insights there. Now, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, which is this idea of acceptance.
Acceptance. Such an important and often misunderstood part of the grief journey.
Exactly. It can be a really loaded word, can't it? So I'm curious to hear more about what Sanchez have to say about it. What does true acceptance actually look like? And is it even possible to truly accept such a profound loss?
He starts by acknowledging that acceptance is often misunderstood. It's not about forgetting the person or pretending that the pain doesn't exist.
So we're not trying to force ourselves to feel happy before we're ready.
No, not at all. He believes that true acceptance is about acknowledging the reality of the loss while also recognizing that life goes on. It's about finding a way to integrate that grief into our lives in a way that allows us to keep moving forward.
So it's like finding a balance between honoring the past and embracing the present and the future.
And he's really clear that acceptance isn't a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process.
Meaning we might have moments where we feel like we've reached a place of acceptance and then something happens and it feels like we're back at square one.
It's like those waves of grief can come and go, sometimes unexpectedly, even years later. And he encourages us to be patient with ourselves and recognize that those fluctuations are totally normal.
So no judgment, just acceptance of where we are in the process.
Right. There's no set timetable for reaching that place of acceptance. And he challenges this idea that acceptance means we've moved on or that we no longer care about the person. He says that's not it at all.
So what does he say it is about?
He believes true acceptance is about finding a way to honor their memory while also allowing ourselves to experience joy and pursue a fulfilling life.
So it's like we can carry their love with us as we continue to grow and evolve as individuals, and that's something we have the power to choose.
He emphasizes that acceptance doesn't mean we'll never feel sad or that we won't miss them. It just means we've found a way to integrate that grief into our lives in a way that allows us to keep living fully and meaningfully.
What a powerful message. It's like grief doesn't have to define us. We can choose to live a life that honors the person we've lost while also embracing all the beauty and joy that life has to offer. How do we actually do that? How do we cultivate acceptance?
Sanchez offers a few really practical suggestions. One is practicing gratitude, even for the small things. He also encourages us to focus on what brings us joy and to nurture our connections with others.
So it's about shifting our focus towards those things that bring us peace and happiness.
And he also emphasizes the importance of forgiveness, forgiving ourselves for any mistakes we might have made, forgiving others who might have hurt us, and even forgiving the person we've lost if there's any unresolved conflict there.
It sounds like he's saying that acceptance isn't just about accepting the loss, it's also about accepting ourselves, imperfections, and all.
And he reminds us that acceptance is a journey, not a destination. We might not ever reach a point where we feel completely at peace with the loss, but we can keep moving towards that, one step at a time.
I love that. It's about progress, not perfection.
Okay.
So much wisdom packed into that concept of acceptance. Okay, we've explored all these big ideas around grief, healing, and acceptance. Now I'm curious to hear what Sanchez has to say about the more practical side of managing those intense emotions. Does he offer any specific strategies for dealing with those tough moments?
He does. He's full of really practical advice, and the things that stand out the most are his emphasis on self-care, connection, and finding meaning. We talked about those a bit earlier, but let's go a little deeper.
Yeah, let's unpack those a bit more. What does he say about self-care specifically?
He emphasizes that self-care is absolutely essential when you're grieving. It's not a luxury. Grief can take such a toll on us, physically, emotionally, mentally. We need to be extra gentle with ourselves during this time.
So what are some of his practical tips for self-care? What does that actually look like in our day-to-day lives?
He suggests things like making sure you're getting enough sleep, eating nutritious food. Even gentle exercise can be helpful. Those basic needs, they're even more important when we're under stress.
Yeah, our bodies and minds are so interconnected. It's like we have to replenish those resources that grief depletes.
Right. And he also encourages us to engage in activities that bring us joy, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Like what kinds of things?
It could be anything. Spending time in nature, listening to music, reading a good book, maybe reconnecting with a hobby you've put on hold.
It's about giving ourselves permission to experience those moments of lightness, even amidst the grief.
Exactly. And something else he talks about is setting boundaries, learning to say no. Especially during the holidays, there's that pressure to attend every event, to be everything for everyone. Sanchez reminds us that it's okay to decline invitations, to step away from situations that feel overwhelming.
So it's about prioritizing our well-being, even if it means maybe disappointing others or breaking with tradition.
He's really adamant that self-care is not selfish, it's an act of self-love. It's about recognizing that we deserve to be treated with kindness, especially when we're hurting.
Okay, that's self-care. What about connection? We talked about that earlier, but why do you think he emphasizes it so much?
Sanchez is a big believer in the power of community. He says over and over again, you don't have to go through this alone. He wants us to reach out to our support systems.
Friends, family, therapists, support groups, all of those people who can offer a listening ear and a compassionate heart.
It's about remembering that we're not alone, that we're part of something bigger, and that sometimes we need to lean on others for support.
So true. And what are some of the benefits of reaching out and connecting with others? Why is it so healing?
Sanchez says that sharing our stories and emotions with others, it can be incredibly cathartic. It helps us process our grief, feel validated, maybe even see things from a different perspective.
Sometimes just having someone listen without judgment can make a world of difference.
It really can. And he also encourages us to seek out those people who bring us joy, the ones who make us laugh, who support us unconditionally, who inspire us.
So it's not just about seeking support, it's also about seeking out joy and connection. Okay, we've got self-care, connection. What about this idea of finding meaning? How does that fit into Sanchez's approach to healing?
He believes that even amidst grief, discovering meaning in our lives is a powerful way to move forward. And he encourages us to think about our values, our passions, the things that make us feel truly alive.
So it's like figuring out what matters most to us and then making sure our lives reflect those values.
Right. He sees grief as an opportunity to kind of reevaluate our choices and make sure we're living authentically in a way that feels aligned with who we are. And he also talks about finding meaning in honoring the person we've lost. You know,
Through rituals or sharing their stories or doing acts of kindness.
exactly. It's about transforming that pain into something positive and purposeful, something that makes a difference in the world.
It's about taking that emotional energy and using it to create something beautiful.
And he also reminds us that even though grief can be so painful, it can also be a catalyst for growth and transformation. It can deepen our understanding of ourselves, our relationships, the world around us.
What a beautiful thought. It's like that pain can lead to something deeper, something richer, something more meaningful. Okay, Sanchez offers so much wisdom and guidance for navigating this incredibly complex experience. As we wrap up our deep dive into the empty seat at the table, I'm feeling incredibly grateful for his insights and for the opportunity to share them with our listeners.
I completely agree. He doesn't sugarcoat things, but he offers so much hope and encouragement. He gives us practical tools to work with, and he reminds us that we're not alone on this journey.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, I get it, it's tough, but you're stronger than you think, and you will get through this. That's such a powerful message.
It really is.
So, as we close out this episode, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to hold on to as they continue their own grief journeys?
Just one. That's tough. But if I had to pick one, I think it would be to remember that grief is a sign of love. It's a testament to the depth of that connection we shared. And instead of trying to suppress or deny those feelings, give yourself permission to experience them fully. Be gentle with yourself. Seek support. You don't have to do this alone.
Such wise words. Grief is love. It's okay to not be okay. And we're all in this together. Those are good things to remember.
They really are.
Okay.
And there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Just honor your own process, whatever that looks like.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. It's been such a rich and insightful conversation.
Really enjoyed it.
We hope it's been helpful for our listeners as well. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.